Okay, now in this second part of the essay, we will one by one deal with the all 8 parts of the essay if we can cover. Otherwise, the third video will also be made available to you for the clear understanding of the whole essay. Now let's see the first topic, the first theme that she deals with in this essay is criticism as a profession or professionalized activity. See, with the emergence of or even in the 19th century, criticism by degrees becoming or has been becoming a profession now. Means now people are charging money, people are getting some reward for writing their criticism. Criticism is not today as it used to be in 17th and 18th century. Only amateur writers like John Dryden, Alexander Pope, and Dr. Samuel Johnson, they did not take any money or any thing in return for writing their criticism. Means they were amateur. Amateur means those who do work for their own pleasure, not for any reward, not for any money. But you see, the scenario in 19th and the 20th century has completely changed. Today, criticism has become a fully professionalized activity. So you see, today critics are contributing to critical journals by including considerations of Mr. X, modifications of Mr. Y's criticism of Mr. Z's article on works like Shakespeare's plays and Marvel's poems. See, she has started the essay very well by giving a very nice example that nowadays in the world there are many critical journals are available. And what are the journal writers doing? They are just go on writing criticism on like hair splitting. Means they are taking far away from the main topic, from the main work, to some very distant things. Like you see here, she has given the example that how in critical journals every critic is writing different considerations. For example, including considerations of Mr. X modification of Mr. Y's criticism. So you see, Mr. Y wrote a criticism and Mr. X some made some modifications into that criticism. But you see, why Mr. Y's criticism was not original one. It was actually the criticism of Mr. Z's article, and that article was actually on the works of Shakespeare and the works of Marvels. Means you see, if we read the this point reversively in a reverse direction, so we will see that first Mr. Z has written article upon Shakespeare's plays or Marvel's poems. Then upon that article, Mr. Y wrote his criticism, and Mr. Y's criticism was included or has been attended by Mr. X with some modifications. So this is the condition today. Means all the critics are doing a very means hair splitting type of work. They are going into deeper and deeper of others considerations. Means here she is very nicely highlighting, pointing us that how criticism and the original work are having a very yawning gap, a very glaring gap between them because of the professionalized activity. Means every critic who is professional is writing anything. So this is not a good thing going on in the field of criticism. But you see, she herself says that but we cannot remove criticism from being called a professional field. It is now inevitable, it is forever. Now criticism is a profession and it will remain a profession. Now see the next point that she covers in this first part. Criticism cannot be a profession like medicine or law. You see, this profession or criticism is a very distinct profession. It is not like medicine or law. They are pure professions. But criticism is an art. There cannot be a general critical council conducting examinations, awarding degree or diploma to get a right to practice criticism. For example, in medicine and law, if you study medicine, if you study law, so after a particular time, after completing the course, you are given the degree, you are given the authority to do something in that profession. But there is no such council, there is no such council, or there is no such authority, there is no such any body that grants you degrees, or that grants you, or that awards you degrees or diplomas, and then you, after getting that degree or diploma, you get the right to practice criticism. So criticism is not the profession like medicine and law, means it is a very different profession. So here we see that in the first part she was discussing that how in 20th century criticism has become a profession or a professionalized activity, but the criticism cannot be fully called a pure profession. It cannot become ever like medicine or law. It will remain art. Criticism is an art. Now in the second section of the essay, critical activities, tasks of a critic. See, the word critic is actually a Greek word, kriton. Kriton means the judge, judge. So when Greeks created this word, when they made the use of this word, so at that time critic means the judge, means who passed judgment. So his primary critical act is a judgment. Judgment means the decision that a certain piece of writing has significance of value. Significance or value, not of value, means it used to be the traditional work, it used to be the basic work of a critic to pass a judgment on a work of art by highlighting that this work or that particular work is very significant or valuable. So this judgment is actually the basic task of a critic traditionally, historically. It is done by the critic's capacity to recognize order and harmony. And you see how only critic understood the value, the significance of the work by his own capacity, by the critic's capacity to recognize order and harmony. Means those who were critics, those who were real critics, they recognize the order in the work, they recognize the harmony in the work, and on the basis of order and harmony they passed the judgment of regarding that work having significance or value. Then it also appeals to the conscience and moral life of the critic. And you see, critics must be very much full of conscience. They should not pass any wrong judgment, or any biased judgment, or any prejudiced judgment on a work of art. Means that they should very honestly, very justly understand the significance of the work and pass their judgment accordingly. That's why this work of this task of critic applies or appeals to conscience and moral life of the critic also. Now another fruitful critical activity is the response to a work of art which has a value. It is the critic's function to assist his readers to find the value in the literary work. And you see, second work of a critic is another fruitful critical activity is the response to a work of art which has value. Means a critic should respond to a work of art, especially to the work of art which is valuable, which has some value, like Homer's Iliad, Homer's Odyssey, and then Virgil's Aeneid. So these are very means great literary works of the world. So if you are a critic, so you should know how to respond to that valuable work. It is the critic's function to assist his readers to find the value in the literary work. See, and you see, after understanding, after responding the work of art which has a value, it is the secondary task of a critic to make it public, to publish it, to massify it, means to spread it to among spread it to common people, that how this work is having great values as a great work of art. So he should spread the knowledge of that value which he found first of all in the work to the public. Now the third, in this section, the capacity to think over works of art and say something which enlarges our conceptions of their value is the rudiment of criticism. And you see, if the critic has understood something, has judged something very valuable, so what he should do what he should do next, the capacity to think over works of art means a critic should think very deeply, he should think very broadly also, and say something which enlarges our conceptions of their value. Means the critic should say something. For example, T.S. Eliot. You see, T.S. Eliot has said something very new, something very novel about Shakespeare's play Hamlet, that it is an artistic failure, because he judged the drama Hamlet by different perspective, like psychoanalytic way, and then he said something new about Hamlet. So this is another. This is one of the tasks that he should say something which enlarges our conceptions of their value is the rudiment. Rudiment is primary of criticism. Means a critic should say something which is clearing the deeper meaning of the work. So this is the second section of the essay in which he talks about the tasks of a critic. Now the third part, in the more very important part, in which Dr. Helen Louis Gardner discusses the title of the essay. You see, this title actually has been derived from the allegory of Johnson, the title of the essay. So allegory means a piece of writing which has two different levels of meaning. One level is dealing with inanimate objects or very obvious meaning, but the deeper meaning is very important, very significant one. So in the same way, Dr. Johnson used an allegory to describe the nature, the function, the duties, the responsibilities of criticism. Let's see what are those aspects of criticism. In the third essay of the book, Dr. Samuel Johnson wrote a book, the Rambler, has given the allegorical description of criticism. So in the third essay, in the third number of that book, the Rambler, he described this allegory. Now, so first of all, it is said that criticism is the daughter of labor and truth. She was given birth by her parents, and her parents are labor and truth. And then after the birth, she was brought up, she was given the space of wisdom. Means she was brought up in the palace of wisdom, and the person who brought her up, the person who helped her in bringing up is justice, and her tutor, her governess, her caretaker was fancy. So you see, this is the allegory Dr. Johnson has used. So you see, criticism actually, according to the allegory, having these things around her, that she is the daughter of labor and truth, brought up into the palace of wisdom and brought up by justice, and her governess was fancy. Then when she sang before the throne of Jupiter, chorus was given by Muses. And you see, when she sang the hymns or the praises of the Lord, the god Jupiter, so it was liked so much that even the muses provided chorus to her singing. Then justice gave criticism a scepter to be held in the right hand. Then justice thought that criticism should be given a power, should be given the sovereignty. So justice gave her a scepter. A scepter means a small stuffed club, which is the symbol of power, which is held by kings, queens, or the rulers in general. So justice gave criticism a scepter to be held in the right hand. Then She held a torch in her left hand which was lighted by truth. And you see, in the right hand there was the scepter, and in the left hand she was given a torch, and that torch was lighted by uh, her mother, Truth. Before returning to heaven, criticism broke the scepter. And you see, when she was going back to heaven, so criticism broke. She shattered the scepter. Why? Because one end of the scepter was caught by flattery and the other by malevolence. Means scepter had two ends, and both the ends were caught by evil powers. First was flattery and the second was malevolence. That's why criticism thought that if these two evils would be connected with both the ends of the scepter, so she will commit a mistake, she will commit a crime by passing wrong judgment. That's why criticism broke the scepter into pieces and did not take the scepter with it. It means criticism preferred, took only the torch in her hand to illuminate the work, to elucidate the work, to throw lights on the work, not to pass judgments on the work. So I hope you might have understood the actual meaning of the allegory and why Helen Gardner chose to have this allegory as the title of her essay. Now, with the help of the above metaphor of Johnson, Gardner prefers the torch than the scepter as a symbol for the critic. So we have cleared this point. Elucidation or illumination is the primary task of a critic. Means the critics, according to Helen Gardner, main task is not to pass judgment or to throw a work into oblivion by passing a wrong judgment, by saying that this is not a good work, but elucidate means clarify or explain the work, or illuminate means throw light upon that work instead of passing judgment. A poem itself speaks to the critic what it has to say and not what the critic wants to say. Means here you see in the third point it is clear that a work itself has the power to say to the critic what is it having inside to understand it. That's why the critic doesn't need any scepter or any authority, any power to pass judgment. So here I stop. I take a pause in the second video, and I hope we will continue in the third video, the remaining parts of the essay. Thank you very much.